My presentation is on the Supreme Court, specifically whether or not the Supreme Court should have term limits. So why is this an issue? This is a bipartisan issue, which means it affects both parties that are currently active in our political system. So the Republican Party first brought up this issue about 15 years ago, around 2006. And recently, about 4 years ago, this has become a Democratic issue, and mainly the Democratic Party has been focusing on this. So the Supreme Court holds the most power in our judicial branch. They're our highest federal court, and they determine the legality of our laws that we put into place, like how constitutional the laws are. Slide. So here are the reasons for change. So recently, we've been getting longer life expectancies since around 1970. And so earlier appointments are happening, so people serve on the court for longer. Recently, Justice Barrett was appointed to the Supreme Court, and she will most likely serve on the court for about 4 decades, which is about the longest time any Supreme Court justice will ever serve. And this is just causing less vacancies, which means the people's voice isn't getting heard as much, with presidents getting less nominations. So the president we vote for is not getting the nominations in, and our people's voice is not getting heard. So there's uneven nominations. With the justices being appointed younger, they have less experience. So when the Brown v. Board of Education happened, all 9 Supreme Court justices were elected to some form of political party, and they were in some position of power before being appointed to the Supreme Court, resulting in more understanding of the law. But now we have 0 justices that have held a nomination beforehand, which is causing the court to become more partisan, as they're just putting in people that favor their views and political party instead of the actual use of the court, which is to establish the constitutionality of our legislation. Slide.
Priceline can save you up to 60% on top hotels.
Supreme Court picks have been skewing younger than in the past.
Interesting data for this. From the founding of our country until 1970,
Sorry, you ready for me to start it?
Yeah, it should start at 20 seconds. I have
Okay,
the time
sorry.
backwards, that's my bad.
Have been skewing younger than in the past, meaning justices are serving for longer. And now some on both sides of the aisle are arguing for term limits. CBSN political contributor and Boston Herald columnist Michael Graham published an article Monday outlining why, during a time marked by political divisions, conservatives and liberals have found common ground when it comes to the Supreme Court. He's here with us now. Michael, always great to see you. First of all, what are the arguments on both sides for Supreme Court term limits?
Well, the argument for term limits from the right has always been that they believe that the court is too powerful and that they fear that it often acts as an unelected legislature, and so it imposes itself into decisions. And this particularly goes back to Roe versus Wade. You could argue same-sex marriage, Obamacare. And so the theory is that when you have people who are appointed by, say, President Ford, President H.W. Bush as we do today, there have been numerous elections and election cycles since then. And so these, the philosophy of the people, the will of the people, if you will, may have been different 30, 40 years ago. In fact, it probably was. And so the court should reflect that at some level, within some restrictions, the thinking of the people, where sovereignty comes from. On the left, they are newly minted fans of Supreme Court term limits. And I think it's no coincidence that the day after Justice Kennedy announced his resignation, suddenly a flurry of articles appeared in the Washington Post, that left-leaning Vox.com, and the Chicago Tribune. Hey, term limits, maybe a good thing.
Supreme Court picks have been skewing younger than in the past, meaning justices are serving for longer. And now
they offer some interesting data for this. From the founding of our country until 1970, the average term of a Supreme Court justice was around 15 years, and there was a new vacancy every couple of years or so. Since 1970, that's now up, the average term is 26 years in the courts. And we went from 1994 till mid-2005 with no vacancies. And that was not the plan, they argue, of the founder.
So in that video, he talks a lot about the voice of the people, which is, in the 20th century, both the presidents, so there's two presidents which had the least and the most amount of nominations.
Supreme Court picks have been skewing younger than in the past.
With the least being 0 and the most being 6, and these all happened in one term of a presidency, who then went on to have no second term. So I feel like this isn't really reflecting the voice of the people. Next slide. But there are reasons that justices are appointed for life. So one is it allows justices to be disconnected from the current political climate, which is sometimes more strenuous and sometimes like just more politically violent. So this allows for unbiased policies, which allows for more central constitutional appointments. And then the terms would cater their decisions to the next appointments, which would lead to biased constitutionality towards the people that hold their position next. Next slide. So here's my opinion. My opinion is that the court has turned into a partisan tool by both sides, used by both sides, and this kind of needs to be changed up to more reflect the voice of the people. There's becoming less vacancies, which is kind of an issue because the voice of the people is most of our population is younger, which means the older generations are getting more say and they're not reflecting the voice of the current population. And the longer they stay in office, there's a slower rotation of new ideas. Next slide. And finally, here's my solution. I think they should have term limits of 18 years staggered every 2 years. So like each presidential term will have 2 appointments, which would result in fresh new ideas coming in around every 2 years. And it will just allow for less time on the court and just a better overall climate in the Supreme Court. And then finally, it should be sources.
Just a couple questions. Anybody?
What are like these older justices voting on that younger generations wouldn't agree with?
So,
what sort of things?
There's a lot of stuff right now, like big one is probably like abortion and stuff like that, which is just it's been in practice since the 50s with the Texas court case that got pulled up to the Supreme Court, but it's just a very hot topic right now. It's just being passed around like the federal courts.
Any other questions?
Jason?
Can the justices, I guess, get out of the Supreme Court before, I guess, they die?
Yeah, they can retire.
All right, thank you.